It started with a spilled box of colored pencils, Amelia's sketch of a winged dog scattered across sun-bleached planks, blues and golds rolling like marbles. Her father bent to gather the mess, muttering about chores, when a distant siren of barking rose from the shelter truck pulling down their lane. Moments later, volunteers unloaded crates, one containing a shepherd so exhausted he could barely lift his head. Yet when the dog's dull eyes landed on Amelia's drawing, futtering in the breeze, something inside them sparked electric. He reached one trembling paw through the bars toward the paper angel, as if recognizing himself in the child's imagined wings. Evan felt the air shift, the unmistakable click of destiny's lock sliding open. Within days, that same dog would carry monitors up hospital ramps, stand between evil and a sleeping child, and teach a grieving family that courage isn't born, it's rescued. Watch on and witness the moment wings become real. The wind in Willow Creek rarely howled. It was the kind of wind that whispered, slipping between wooden fence posts, rustling wheat-colored grasses, brushing against the tin roof of the old barn as if afraid to wake the ghosts inside. Amelia Quinn sat at the edge of the meadow where the wildflowers still grew defiantly, even in the shadow of the accident. Her wheelchair faced the barn's hollow frame, now half-collapsed and sealed with caution tape long since faded by sun and rain. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers quietly tracing the embroidered seam of her dress. She was 6, small for her age, but with eyes that had seen more than any child ever should. Beside her, an old wooden swing dangled from a cracked sycamore limb. It creaked softly, moved only by the wind or perhaps memory. That was her mother's swing. The last time it moved on its own, it wasn't the wind that pushed it. It was laughter and hands, and the scent of lavender oil clinging to cotton skirts. Now it swayed empty, like a song half forgotten. Amelia didn't speak much. She whispered to butterflies sometimes, and sometimes to her knees, which she'd never felt. But mostly, she watched. The barn, the clouds, the swing, waiting for something that never came. Up on the porch of the ranch house, Evan Quinn stood still, arms crossed tight over his chest, as if holding his own ribs together. His firefighter jacket hung on a nail behind the door, untouched since the night flames devoured more than just wood and hay. His eyes, tired, red, and sleepless, stayed locked on Amelia. He never said it aloud, but the thought haunted him every morning. Why her legs? Why not mine? She hadn't cried at the funeral. Not once. Neither had he. Grief had settled over the two of them like dust, soft, choking, and impossible to clean. The swing creaked again. A single feather, white and weightless, drifted from the sky and landed at her feet. Inside the house, lunch went cold more often than it was eaten. The dining table still had 3 chairs. Evan had never moved the third one, and he couldn't bring himself to tell Amelia why the flowers in the barn never grew back. The attic always smelled like cedar and ash. Evan hadn't stepped foot up here in nearly a year. The wooden ladder groaned under his weight as he pulled himself into the low-ceilinged space, ducking instinctively as dust motes shimmered like ghosts in the single shaft of afternoon light. Outside, the wind murmured across the ranch, brushing gently against the slanted roof. Downstairs, the house was still. Amelia had fallen asleep beside a stack of watercolor books, her tiny hand resting on the page where she'd drawn a field of dogs with wings he needed to clean. That was the excuse. The truth was heavier. Evan knelt beside an old trunk. The brass hinges resisted at first, like the past refusing to be opened. Then, with a hollow click, it gave in. Inside, time had been folded away with the care of a man who didn't know what to throw out. His firefighter helmet lay atop a stack of gear, scorched gloves, the yellowed turnout coat with his last unit patch, and a smoke-dusted badge tucked in the fold of a wool shirt. He picked up the helmet. It still bore a streak of melted plastic from the day the grain silo exploded, killing 2 rookies under his watch. He had escaped through a wall of flame with only a torn shoulder and a scream buried in his chest. That was years ago, long before the barn fire, long before Charlotte's hands stopped reaching for him in the dark. He set the helmet down and exhaled slowly through his nose. His hands trembled. Beneath the gear was a small box of newspaper clippings, yellowed and creased at the corners. Articles about structure fires, community rescues, fundraising events where he and his crew had posed for photos with soot-stained smiles. Back when he believed he could outrun pain by rushing into someone else's. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, but something found him. Tucked beneath a headline, "Volunteer Department receives new thermal imaging drone," was a small folded notice. Thinner paper, not from the local news. He opened it carefully. Retired K9 left at shelter after handler's death. Ruger, a 7-year-old German shepherd formerly assigned to search and rescue, was surrendered to the Jefferson County shelter after the passing of his military handler. Shelter reports say the dog has refused food and remains unresponsive. Officials uncertain about adoption potential. There was a photo, black and white, grainy. That same emptiness in the dog's eyes. He saw it every day in the mirror. He had tried everything to fill it, working the land, stacking wood, painting Amelia's room to match her favorite sunrise, but nothing reached that quiet space inside him where guilt had made its home. He thought of Charlotte again, her hands that once smelled like lemon soap and goat feed, the way she used to touch his shoulder whenever she wanted to remind him, "You made it home." That matters, that she didn't make it. The barn had collapsed before he could pull her from the flames, and for all his years of training, all the drills, the certifications, the rescues, he couldn't save the one life that meant more than his own. And Amelia? She had been found outside, curled in her mother's shawl, legs twisted unnaturally beneath her. No one could explain how she'd survived, or why. The guilt came in waves. Some nights it roared, some nights it whispered. Like the night he had first dreamed of a German shepherd standing at the foot of Amelia's bed, silent, unmoving, watching over her like a statue carved from grief. Evan folded the clipping and slid it into the front pocket of his shirt. He rose slowly, joints stiff, heart heavier. Downstairs, a kettle began to hiss. Before he climbed down the ladder, he paused. He looked around the attic once more, this room of things that used to matter, and realized he didn't want to be a man surrounded by relics anymore. Not when his daughter still had breath in her lungs. Not when some part of her still smiled. And not while a dog like Ruger, forgotten, starving, fading in silence, might still be waiting for someone to say his name again. The rain hadn't let up all morning. It fell in soft, persistent sheets, smearing the windshield like a memory Evan couldn't quite wipe away. His truck idled in front of the Jefferson County shelter, a squat concrete building that used to be a bus depot, now repurposed with chain-link pens and the stale smell of bleach. Evan sat for a long time without moving. Wipers ticked back and forth. He stared through the gray at the flickering porch light above the entrance. It reminded him of a hospital hallway after a bad call. He flexed his jaw once, then cut the engine and stepped out into the cold. The front desk volunteer was young, too young to understand the kind of grief Evan carried like a second skin. She offered him a polite smile and a clipboard, eyes scanning the name he'd written. "You're here for the German shepherd?" she asked, uncertain. He nodded. She hesitated. "He's not what people expect. Doesn't really come to the fence. Doesn't bark. Blown, casting half the kennel in shadow. Ruger lay curled at the back, ribs visible under patchy fur, paws tucked beneath him like he was trying to vanish. He didn't lift his head when they approached, didn't growl, didn't react at all. Evan stepped closer. "Ruger," he said, voice low, as if speaking to something on the edge of breaking. No response. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days," the girl said gently. "Won't drink unless we leave the bowl and walk away." Evan crouched, knees cracking, and rested one hand on the cold floor outside the bars. "You're not gone," he whispered. "Not yet." Something in Ruger's ears twitched, barely, but it was there. Evan let the silence breathe. He didn't reach in, didn't call again. He just sat there, grounded in his stillness, letting the dog choose what to do with it. After a few minutes, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photo, worn and creased at the edges. It was Amelia, 6 years old, paint on her cheeks, her eyes shining beneath the brim of a straw hat. Her wheelchair was half hidden in tall grass, but her smile outshone the meadow. Evan slid the photo under the gate. "You'd like her," he murmured. "She talks to birds, paints dogs with wings, thinks sadness is something you can plant and water until it grows into something better." A flicker. Ruger's head moved, just an inch, just enough to see the photo. Then came the smallest sound, not a bark, not even a whine. A breath, a shift in ribs, eyes, dark as coal, locked onto the image. Evan leaned in closer, keeping his voice steady, softer now. "Her name is Amelia." And then it happened. Ruger tilted his head, barely a few degrees, but it was the first time he had moved with intention, the first time he had acknowledged anything outside himself. The volunteer gasped under her breath. Evan didn't speak again. He stayed still, let the moment settle like dust in the silence. It was the dog's eyes that spoke, not trust, not yet, but something older, a recognition not of the man before him, but of what he carried, pain, loneliness, the scent of a house that held a child. Evan stood slowly. "I'll take him," he said. The girl blinked. "Sir, he's not. He hasn't even. I'll take him." There was steel in his voice now, not the kind that needed to shout, but the kind that didn't yield. By the time they got the paperwork signed, Ruger still hadn't moved from the back corner. They had to coax him with a trail of treats he didn't eat, guide him gently with a leash he didn't resist. He didn't limp, but every step looked like it cost him more than his bones could afford. In the truck, Evan didn't speak. And glance out the window as the rain began to lighten. Back toward Willow Creek, toward a girl with paint-stained hands and a room filled with books about stars and talking foxes. Toward the first light Ruger had seen in a long, long time. The truck rolled down the gravel path, its headlights cutting soft grooves through the evening fog. Out in the pasture, a few horses shifted in the mist, barely visible shapes breathing into the chill. Porch light flickered once, then held steady, as if it too had waited all day for Evan to return, with something that wasn't broken. Ruger didn't move during the drive. Even when Evan gently opened the back door, the dog stayed curled up tight, his frame motionless beneath the old firefighter's blanket. It wasn't fear. It wasn't refusal. It was something deeper, as if every bone in his body had made peace with disappearing. "You're home now," Evan whispered. The word tasted strange on his tongue. Home. It hadn't sounded like much in recent months. just walls and air. But tonight, something about saying it to the quiet creature on his seat gave it a different weight. Ruger slowly raised his head. Didn't make a sound, didn't wag, just stared. Amelia was already asleep. Her room glowed in the soft light of the moon lamp, casting slow-moving constellations on the ceiling. Her breathing was steady, chest rising beneath the thin quilt covered in hand-painted flowers. She clutched her stuffed rabbit in one arm, her other hand resting loosely over the railing of the crib Evan had modified to fit her chair beside it. Evan led Ruger in, step by careful step. The dog's nails clicked softly on the wooden floorboards. Not the eager scurry of excitement, but the slow, deliberate echo of someone walking through a memory that didn't belong to them. He stopped at the threshold, paused, then padded forward and lay down, not at the foot of the bed, not in the corner, but right beside the crib, head resting against the leg of the frame, eyes open, ears angled slightly toward the girl. He didn't blink. Evan watched from the doorway, hand still on the light switch, unsure whether to cry or breathe. In all the years since his wife's death, he hadn't felt this particular kind of ache. The ache of watching two broken things find each other in the dark. He stepped back, letting the door close with a quiet click. Downstairs, the kitchen clock ticked louder than it needed to. He poured a bowl of watching her eyes open, unmoving. Not out of tension, but something older, deeper. Like a sentinel waiting at a shrine, or a soldier too tired to sleep, too loyal to look away. At 3:12 a.m., Amelia whimpered in her sleep. Ruger's ears twitched. He didn't bark, didn't stand, but he inched closer, nose pressing softly to the edge of the blanket, as if memorizing the shape of her breath. Her whimpers stopped. She turned her face slightly, as if leaning into a presence that had always been there. At 5:47 a.m., the sky began to pale. Birdsong hadn't started yet. The world still held its breath. Evan opened the door one last time, sleep-crushed eyes, flannel draped across one shoulder. He expected Ruger to be curled up or gone or finally resting. But the dog hadn't moved. Same place, same position, eyes still open. Watching over a little girl who had no idea the world had changed in the night. Evan's throat tightened. He crouched low, whispering to the dog, "You didn't have to, all night." Ruger turned his head just slightly and blinked. Once. Not tired. Not asking for praise, just acknowledging. And in that quiet blink, Evan understood something unspoken. This wasn't obedience. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't even instinct, it was promise. Not the kind sealed in commands or contracts or leashes, but the kind that lingers in the air, when two souls who've both lost something precious find someone else who still has something to lose. Downstairs, the coffee pot hissed. Upstairs, the girl dreamed on. And Ruger, the forgotten one, kept watch. Not because he was told, but because he had chosen. Morning broke gently over the ranch. Not with fanfare, but with the hush of golden light spilling across the worn porch rail. The world seemed to exhale slowly, as if it too understood the weight of silence and the relief of soft routines. Evan stirred early. As always, old habits. Before dawn, before memory could crawl in with its sharp teeth. He moved quietly through the kitchen, letting the kettle hum instead of whistle, spooning coffee into his chipped mug, with the care one reserves for sacred rituals. Outside, the barn stood stoic against the pale sky. Inside the house, Amelia's soft humming began, faint and cracked with sleep, but bright, like sunlight through lace curtains. Ruger was already there when Evan peeked into her room, as he had every morning for the past week. Of damp soil. Amelia sat propped in her chair, bundled in an old crocheted shawl that had once belonged to her mother. Her curls were pinned back with butterfly clips, and in her lap sat a palette of tempera paint and a jar of murky water. Ruger lay beside her, patient, composed, as if posing for something larger than a portrait, maybe a memory. She dipped her brush into the pink and looked at him seriously. "Hold still, sir," she said, frowning with exaggerated professionalism. Ruger blinked, didn't flinch, didn't even twitch when the soft bristles brushed across his fur, right between the shoulder blades. "You're an angel now," she declared, and painted one sweeping wing across his back. "Or maybe a Pegasus," she added thoughtfully, "but the quiet kind. One who doesn't fly much anymore, but still remembers how." Evan sat nearby watching. He pretended to sketch, old graphite in a worn notebook, but really, he was just tracing outlines of peace, the kind that came not from answers, but from watching your daughter laugh and seeing her fingertips leave color where once there had only been grief. Ruger's fur was streaked in pinks and purples, blotched with the abstract language of a child who loved without hesitation. She reached for blue next, dipped, swirled, dabbed. The paint caught on Ruger's coat, and when her hand wobbled too far to the side, a streak landed on her own wrist. She giggled. Ruger lifted his head, gazed at the spot, and with slow gentleness leaned forward to lick the paint off her skin. She froze, then whispered, "You kissed me." He looked up at her. No wag, no bark, just the stillness of a dog who understood something had shifted. Evan's throat tightened. He turned his face away for a moment, pretending to adjust his pencil, but really, he was hiding the way his eyes burned. 3 heartbeats. That's what this place had become. One old man carrying grief in quiet bones. One little girl wrapped in softness and steel. And one dog, painted in wings, who chose them both, not out of training, but out of something older than language. Later that afternoon, clouds rolled in but didn't stay. Evan wheeled Amelia back toward the house, and Ruger followed at her side, not out of command, but communion. Inside, the kettle hummed again. Amelia changed into clean clothes and giggled at the blue paw prints Ruger had left in the hallway. Evan didn't scold, just took a picture with his phone and whispered, "We'll keep that one." By evening, the 3 sat together on the porch, Amelia lean, beating soft and somehow beating in time. It was the kind of night where even the wind held its breath. The ranch lay under a velvet sky, the fields bathed in the muted silver of a half-moon. Crickets had quieted, the trees stood motionless. Inside the farmhouse, the only sound was the slow tick of the clock in the hallway, like a heartbeat left behind. Evan lay on the couch again. He had meant to go to bed. He always meant to. But somewhere between Amelia's nightly breathing checks and the ache in his back that never quite left, the couch had become his place, a compromise between sleep and vigilance. The fire had gone out hours ago. Shadows softened across the wooden floor. All was still. Until it wasn't. A soft nudge at his knee. Then again, and again. Evan blinked, eyes adjusting to the dark. A shape moved low in the room, solid, tense. "Ruger?" he rasped, still half dreaming. The dog let out a breath, low and urgent. His nose pressed against Evan's hand now, not playful, not curious, demanding. Evan sat up fully, alarm settling into his spine. "What is it, boy?" Ruger turned and paced toward the hallway, then back again. Then whined, barely audible, but sharp enough to slice through Evan's confusion. And that's when he noticed it. The silence. The monitor. No sound. Evan stood so quickly the blanket tangled around his feet. He reached Amelia's room in 3 strides. What he saw stopped him cold. Amelia lay curled beneath her blanket, but her face was pale in a way no parent ever forgets. The kind of pale that has nothing to do with sleep. Her brow was wet with sweat, her lips tinged the faintest blue, the oxygen sensor on her finger blinked red, an alarm muted by some unknown glitch. Evan dropped to his knees. "Amelia," he whispered, already reaching for the backup oxygen mask. No response. Ruger stood in the doorway, not moving, not barking. Just watching, steady, ready. Evan placed the mask over her nose and mouth, checking the lines with hands that trembled more than he wanted to admit. "Come on, baby. Breathe. You're okay. You're okay. I'm here." Amelia stirred faintly, eyelids fluttering like a bird trying to wake. A beep, then another. The oxygen levels began to climb. Still too low, but rising. Evan didn't speak. He just held her. And waited. 10 minutes later, she was stable. No hospital, not this time. But the edge had been too close. Closer than he could. Was warm, solid, alive. She could have. He stopped. Couldn't say the rest. The clock in the hallway ticked on. Then a sound. Soft, thready. "Daddy?" Amelia's voice. Evan scrambled to her side. She blinked slowly, mask still in place. "You're okay, sweetheart," he said, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "You're okay. Ruger woke me up." Her eyes drifted toward the doorway, her fingers curled weakly in Evan's hand. "He always stays," she murmured, then closed her eyes again. Evan sat back down beside her bed. Ruger lay at her feet, resting his chin on her blanket like a soldier back on post. It took a long time for Evan to sleep again. When he did, it was with one hand resting lightly on Amelia's shoulder and his other palm quietly resting on Ruger's head, as if to say, without words, "Thank you for hearing what I almost missed." The morning sun crept gently over the ridge, spilling honey-colored light across the ranch. It was the kind of light that made everything look softer, gentler, as though the world itself had decided, just for today, to be kind. Amelia's wheelchair rolled slowly through the tall grasses, the rubber wheels creaking faintly with each push. The field beyond the house was awake with color. Goldenrod swayed beside bursts of purple clover, and butterflies danced without direction in the still air. The breeze was barely enough to stir her hair, but it carried the faint scent of warm earth and something wild. Ruger padded behind her, close but not crowding. His ears twitched at every distant bird call, but his gaze never strayed far from Amelia. He walked like a shadow that had chosen not to belong to anything else. "Did you know butterflies can remember?" Amelia said suddenly, not turning back. Her voice was light, full of secret knowledge the way only a child's voice can be. Ruger gave no reply, of course, but he tilted his head just a little, as if saying, "Tell me more." "I read it in that book Daddy left by the window. It said they remember being caterpillars. Isn't that kind of magical?" She giggled softly and stretched out a hand. One small monarch landed on her knuckle, its wings pulsing like tiny lungs. "I think maybe you remember too," she whispered, glancing down at Ruger. "From before, from the place they didn't feed you. I think you remember what it's like to be scared." Ruger didn't make a sound. He simply pressed his nose against the side of her wheelchair as they moved forward, an anchor in fur and bone. Behind them, near the edge of the porch, Evan sat with a sketchpad resting on his knee. He hadn't meant to watch, not at first, but he'd poured his coffee, stepped outside, and caught sight of them, his daughter and the dog who had become more than just protector. So now he watched in silence toward the flowers. The rise of Ruger's back as he trotted beside her, poised and gentle. The fragile joy that bloomed quietly between them. Amelia stopped by a patch of bluebonnets and looked skyward. Her eyes squinted at the brightness, but she didn't seem to mind. "Sometimes I wonder if Mommy's in the butterflies," she said, so softly it almost vanished in the wind. "Like, maybe she flies beside us, and we just don't know which one she is." Ruger sat beside her then, eyes scanning the meadow, tail unmoving. He didn't blink much anymore when Amelia spoke of her mother. He'd learned, somehow, to stay very still during those moments. "I miss her," Amelia said. "I know Daddy does too, but he gets quiet when I say it out loud, so I only tell you." From the porch, Evan paused mid-sketch. A soft line trembled beneath his hand. "I think you're my brother," Amelia added, scratching lightly behind Ruger's ear. "Not the same kind. Not the kind who steals your snacks. The kind who would never leave you." The monarch lifted off her hand and spun upward in lazy spirals. Ruger gave a faint chuff, barely audible. Amelia smiled. "See? You agree." They continued forward. She reached the middle of the field, the highest point, where the wildflowers brushed her arms when the wind picked up. Here, the world felt bigger somehow, like it remembered its own quiet power. "Sometimes," she said to Ruger, "I wonder if my legs are dreaming. Like, maybe they think they're still asleep and just forgot how to wake up." The German shepherd tilted his head again, then moved closer. He nuzzled her side with his broad head and let out a deep breath through his nose. "You don't think they're lazy, do you?" Silence. "Good," she whispered. "Me neither." A few feet away, Evan finally lowered his pencil. The page was full now, shaded with charcoal smudges, strokes of tenderness and longing. He hadn't meant to draw for so long. He'd lost track of time the way one only does when witnessing something real. He didn't call to her, didn't want to break the spell. Instead, he set the sketch pad beside him and just sat there, hands clasped loosely, letting the weight of the moment press gently against his ribs. He remembered a time, years ago now, when mornings were filled with alarms and rushing, when the only sound was news radio and clattering dishes. He remembered firehouse coffee, too hot and always stood, joints cracking, and walked across the grass toward them. Ruger watched him approach, tail thumping once, then again. 3 heartbeats. 3 shapes under the sky. A girl in a wheelchair, a man with charcoal on his fingertips, and a dog who remembered everything he never said. The late afternoon light was slanting low across the kitchen floor when Amelia whispered, "I want to stand." It wasn't dramatic. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She simply said it like she was stating the weather, her small hands folded over the rim of her tray, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the porch door. Evan froze. He'd been pouring oat milk into her glass, the gentle swirl still dancing inside the cup when her words found him. He looked at her slowly. "What did you say, honey?" Amelia turned toward him with a kind of fragile certainty. "I want to stand, just once, just to see how it feels." Evan's heart did that thing it hadn't done in months, stuttered, then swelled. His lips parted, but no words came. Ruger lifted his head from the floor. He had been dozing near Amelia's wheels, one paw twitching in sleep, ears rising like radar. It had been nearly 3 years since the accident, since the fire, since the moment Evan held his little girl and screamed into the smoke, begging the world to take everything else and just let her live. The doctors had said she'd never walk again, that her spinal damage was complete, that sometimes survival came with stillness. But no one had ever asked Amelia what she wanted. And now here it was, quiet, clear, undeniable. Evan set down the cup. He knelt in front of her, hands resting on the metal of her chair like it was holy ground. "Okay," he said. "Then we'll try." That night, after Amelia had fallen asleep with her hand resting gently against Ruger's flank, Evan sat alone in the garage, with the blueprints of a man who used to build things for emergencies, fire escapes, rescue lifts, braces for collapsed ceilings. Now, he was trying to build something for hope. He dragged the old drafting table from the corner. Dust billowed, the lamp flickered, and for the first time in years, Evan retrieved the mechanical pencils and calipers he'd once used like extensions of himself. He didn't know exactly what he was drawing at first. The lines came instinctively, angles of support, soft curves that wouldn't cut into skin, weight-bearing bars that could be adjusted as she grew. He imagined straps lined with fleece, adjustable clasps, something that would feel less like a prison and more like a prayer. And somewhere in the middle of it all, between erasures and equations, he felt the warm weight of a head settle beside his elbow. Ruger had climbed up without a sound, rested man's hand, then back again to the sketch. Evan chuckled under his breath, the sound hoarse. "You don't even know what this is, do you?" But something in Ruger's gaze, steady, unblinking, felt like he did. Evan ran a calloused hand down Ruger's back. "She wants to stand. Not forever. Just long enough to remember what it feels like." Ruger gave a low exhale, something between a sigh and a promise. Evan returned to the drawing, his pencil softened now, as if Ruger's presence steadied his hand. The house was silent except for the scratch of lead and the occasional whistle of wind through the eaves. In the far room, the baby monitor crackled quietly, broadcasting nothing but breath and sleep and the occasional twitch of a dream. Time passed. Outside, the moon rose, and inside that quiet garage, something was born. Part machine, part love letter. The next morning, Evan brought the prototype out to the porch. It wasn't much yet. Aluminum rods repurposed from an old walker, a leather harness from his fire gear cut and refitted, Velcro straps sewn by hand, uneven but sturdy. Amelia's eyes lit up when she saw it, not because it was perfect, but because it existed. "Is that for me?" she asked, sitting straighter in her chair. Evan nodded. "It's just the beginning. We'll need to test it, adjust the angles, and it may not work right away." "But you made it," she said, and that was enough. Ruger circled the brace once, sniffed it, then sat beside it like a sentry. Amelia reached out and touched the metal with the reverence of someone touching the edge of a dream. "It looks strong," she whispered. "It has to be," Evan replied. "It's carrying everything you are." Later that day, Amelia asked for her paints. She dipped her brush into soft gold and traced lines down Ruger's back, wings, childlike and shimmering. "Because you carry me too," she whispered. Ruger didn't move. He stayed perfectly still, eyes soft, tail brushing the wood like a metronome of patience. Evan watched them from the screen door. He didn't speak, just pressed his forehead against the frame and let the moment carve something open in him. Outside, beneath the late morning sun, a girl in a wheelchair painted her guardian with wings, and beside her sat a brace that wasn't perfect, but was loved already. Sometimes it wasn't about making miracles. Sometimes it was about saying yes when someone whispered they wanted to try. Theme, intuition, subtle tension, and the quiet voice of warning. The first time Madeline stepped onto the porch, the wind paused. Just for a moment, like the land itself was holding its breath. She wore soft shoes that didn't crunch on gravel. "Mr. Quinn, I'm Madeline Rowe, from Willow County In-Home Services. They said you requested assistance a few days a week." Evan nodded, his shoulders tight beneath the flannel. He glanced over his shoulder to where Amelia was humming to herself on the floor inside, placing puzzle pieces around Ruger's massive paw like a sunburst. The dog didn't move. "Yeah," Evan replied, "I appreciate you coming all the way out here." Inside, Evan poured coffee while Madeline walked the rooms, noting the layout, the medical equipment, the routines written carefully on the fridge with magnets. "She sleeps from 8 to 6, Madeline asked. Evan nodded. "She's on oxygen only during sleep. Unless her vitals drop, then full mask. And this is her primary aid?" She gestured toward the dog, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Evan gave a small laugh. "He's more reliable than most people." She didn't argue, just took a small notebook from her bag and jotted something down in neat, tidy cursive. "Have you worked with kids like Amelia before?" Evan asked. "Similar cases, yes." She looked up. Not all of them had fathers who took time off firefighting to become full-time engineers. Evan's jaw tightened slightly. "I had to." She didn't press. That in itself told him something. By noon, Amelia had warmed to her. Madeline didn't treat her like porcelain. She didn't speak in that sing-song voice adults used when they didn't know how to speak to children in wheelchairs. Instead, she helped Amelia water the hanging plants and praised her memory for the names of every bloom. "You named your violets?" Madeline asked, smiling. "Of course. That one's Margot, and the little one there is Tuesday." "Well, Tuesday looks thirsty," she said, handing over the small copper can. Ruger sat in the doorway, head resting on his front paws. His eyes never left Madeline. Evan watched from the kitchen as Amelia giggled for the first time in days. "She's good with her," he admitted aloud. It was unclear if he meant to say it for himself or for Ruger, but Ruger didn't respond, just blinked, slow and unmoved. That evening, after Madeline had left and the sky turned a dark watercolor of violets and rust, Evan lingered on the porch steps. He sipped his coffee, lukewarm now, and listened to the creak of the old swing in the tree. The same swing that never moved unless the wind decided to remember something. Behind him, the screen door cracked open. Ruger stepped out, slow and deliberate. He sat beside Evan, silent. His tail didn't wag. "You didn't like her," Evan said, glancing sideways. "You didn't do anything, but you didn't trust her." Ruger said nothing, but his eyes, deep and ancient, held a knowing that went beyond obedience. She was kind to Amelia. That counts for something. Ruger exhaled long and low, a sound almost human in its patience. You were like this when the propane line cracked, too. Wouldn't stop barking until I found it. Still no reply. Evan looked up at the stars. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I want to believe someone can help carry the weight. Ruger leaned his body just slightly into Evan's leg, warm and steady. It wasn't resistance, but it wasn't agreement either. That night, as the house settled into its usual quiet, Evan lay awake longer than usual. In the baby monitor, Amelia's soft breath rose and fell steadily. Ruger lay at the foot of her bed. Every now and then, his ears twitched at a sound only he could hear. At 2:13 a.m., something shifted. Not loudly, just off. A faint creak from the porch. Then silence. Ruger lifted his head, nose twitching, muscles tensing. He didn't bark, he didn't move from Amelia's side, but his eyes stayed trained on the window for a long, long time. Morning came the same way it always did in Willow Creek, slow, gold-tinted, and soft around the edges. But something in the rhythm had shifted. The old coffee pot still hissed on the counter. Amelia's butterfly curtains still danced in the breeze, but Ruger was not in his usual place by the fireplace. He was standing outside Amelia's door, still as stone, ears forward, eyes locked on nothing, shoulders squared like a soldier back on duty. Evan noticed it first, on his way down the hall with a mug in hand. He blinked once, then twice. "Ruger?" he said, his voice hoarse from sleep. The dog didn't move. "Hey, it's okay, bud," Evan added, stepping closer. "She's fine. I just checked her monitor." But Ruger didn't budge, didn't even blink. The only sign he'd heard was a slow twitch of the tail, not a wag, just a small flick, like he was measuring something in grid paper. Madeline was inside, reading with Amelia, her voice low and warm, pausing between sentences to let Amelia guess the next word. It sounded nice, sweet even, but Evan couldn't shake it. The dog hadn't eaten 3 meals now, and not once had Ruger broken his new post by Amelia's door. Not when the mail truck came, not even when Evan rattled his old leash by the hooks. It wasn't stubbornness, it was something else. "Come on, boy," Evan muttered as he crouched beside Ruger with a bowl of chicken and rice, his old favorite. The dog didn't sniff it, didn't even look. His eyes stayed on the hallway where Madeline had just walked past with folded laundry in her arms. Evan's tone sharpened. "Seriously, Ruger, enough. You've been doing this for days. Nothing. You're not some rookie pup anymore. You're acting like a jealous kid. Still nothing." Evan sighed and set the bowl down with more force than necessary. Ruger's ears twitched, but not toward the sound. His eyes were still pinned down the hallway. Madeline peeked from the kitchen. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Evan lied. "Just stubborn old man behavior." She smiled sympathetically. "He probably misses being the center of attention." Maybe, but Evan didn't believe it. Not really, and Ruger knew he didn't. That night, Evan sat in bed thumbing through an old notepad from his training days. Notes on canine behavior, old case sketches, commands, behavioral triggers, all the things he'd sworn he'd never forget. One line caught his eye, circled in red. "Trust the dog." They sense what you can't explain. He closed the notebook and stared at the ceiling. Ruger hadn't barked, hadn't growled, hadn't disobeyed a single command. But he hadn't moved from Amelia's door for 72 hours, and he hadn't eaten since Madeline started staying late. Coincidence? It should have been. But Evan had worn turnout gear long enough to know that gut feelings don't always show up loud. Sometimes they show up in silence. At 3:12 a.m., a soft creak echoed through the house. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to wake Ruger. He was already standing before the second step of the staircase groaned. From his shadowed post by Amelia's door, he growled low, the sound barely audible, like gravel shifting under pressure. Evan stirred in his bed, eyes opening slowly. Something felt off. He didn't know why he got up. He didn't hear a voice, didn't hear a bang, just the weight in his chest. When he stepped into the hallway, Ruger didn't look at him. He was staring at the end of the corridor, toward the kitchen. Evan followed his gaze. There was nothing, no one. The window above, brushing hair from her face. "Thought I'd get a head start with Amelia's meds." She stepped inside. Ruger growled. Quiet, low, but this time unmistakable. Evan's patience frayed. "Ruger, enough." But the dog didn't stop. "Outside, now." The growl faded, but Ruger didn't move. He just looked at Evan. Eyes searching, pleading almost. Evan looked back, torn, weary, unsure which voice to follow. The polite words of the woman offering help, or the silent stare of the dog who'd never once failed him. He chose silence. "Go," Evan said again, pointing toward the back door. Ruger left slowly, but his eyes never left Madeline, not even once. The storm came in just after dusk, not a loud one, no thunder, no lightning, just the quiet, steady fall of rain tapping on the tin roof like fingers unsure of their place. In the hallway, the floorboards creaked beneath Evan's weight as he moved with hurried steps toward Amelia's room. He didn't need to check the monitor. He could feel it in his gut, the way her breathing shifted through the baby monitor, thin, whistled, uneven. "Sweetheart?" Evan's voice cracked as he swung open the door. Amelia lay curled in a tight ball, her arms tucked in under her chin, hair damp with sweat. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips tinged just slightly blue. "Jesus!" He knelt beside her in a flash, feeling her forehead, burning. The oxygen machine hummed softly, but the green light flickered, intermittent, not steady. A warning blink. Evan cursed and smacked the side of the unit. "Not tonight! Come on, don't do this!" Amelia stirred but didn't wake. Her lashes fluttered like fallen feathers. That's when the scratching started. A slow, deliberate scrape, claws on wood. Evan turned his head. Ruger. He was outside Amelia's door again, pawing, not at her, but at the cabinet across the hall. The one where the meds were kept, the one always locked. The one Evan had never seen Ruger pay attention to. The dog pressed his paw again, more urgent this time, then looked back at Evan, eyes dark and wide, as if begging. "Not now," Evan muttered. Another scratch, then a whine. "I said not now." Ruger froze. Then, just as slowly, he sat down, never looking away from that drawer. Evan hoisted Amelia into his arms, carrying her to the living room where the backup tank sat beneath a worn quilt. He connected the mask, adjusted the flow. She coughed, sharp, dry, and whimpered. Still, no real improvement. Minutes bled into an hour. Amelia was stable, but only barely. Evan sat on the edge of the sofa, one hand on her back, the other gripping the oxygen dial like it might suddenly listen to. Amelia stirred in fear. Evan snapped. He stood, crossed the room in 4 strides, and yanked the front door open. Ruger stood there in the rain, dripping, unmoving. "You do not bark at her," Evan growled. The dog tilted his head, tail low. "You scared her. You hear me? This is not the time for games." Another low whine. "Out! Now!" He stepped forward, shut the door behind Ruger, and twisted the lock. The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. The night wore on with no improvement. Evan checked Amelia's vitals every 20 minutes. Her fever refused to break. He replaced the machine's tubing, double-checked power, tried cool compresses. Nothing worked. It wasn't until 2:43 a.m. that he remembered Ruger's scratching. The drawer. He rose slowly, walked to the cabinet, and unlocked it with shaking fingers. Everything was where it should be, or so he thought. Then he noticed the second drawer, where the pre-dosed syringes were kept for emergencies. The one labeled steroid adjunct rescue only. 1 dose was missing, or maybe never replaced. His stomach turned. He knelt down, shuffling through boxes. There it was, used, empty, logged, labeled. 3 weeks ago, never refilled, and he had forgotten. Not the machine, not the tubing, him. Outside, Ruger scratched once more, just one, then sat in the pouring rain, waiting. Evan opened the door without thinking. The dog stepped in, wet, silent. Their eyes met. No anger, no blame, just something quieter. A grief shared. "I'm sorry," Evan whispered, and it wasn't clear if he was saying it to the dog or to himself. Ruger walked past him without pause, straight to Amelia. He laid beside her and rested his chin gently against her leg. No movement, no sound, just warmth, like he had always done. And in the stillness, Evan understood something that hadn't occurred to him since the fire years ago. Sometimes, the most important alarms don't come from machines. They come from the ones who never speak, but never stop watching. It began with a sound no one could mistake for anything else. A claw. Wood. A desperate rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then a pause. Then again. Evan shot upright from his desk, where he'd fallen asleep beside a half-drunk cup of cold coffee and a page of engineering sketches soaked with regret. The rain had stopped, but the sound, sharp and frantic, kept echoing from the hallway. "Ruger? Ruger," Evan barked. The dog didn't turn, didn't stop. Instead, he threw his full weight into the door, and for a second, Evan thought he saw blood. Just a streak, dark and wet, down the dog's left shoulder. That's when his heart dropped. He pushed past the dog and grabbed the doorknob, locked. "Amelia!" No answer. He cursed, fumbled for the emergency key. Another growl from Ruger. No time. Evan dropped his shoulder and slammed into the door, once, twice. The third hit cracked it open. And what he saw would never leave him. Amelia lay crumpled on the hardwood floor, face pressed against her pillow. Her hair was damp, her lips not just pale but blue, a terrifying shade of it. A syringe rolled at her side, a vial half empty, label torn, insulin. No, 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 no. "Amelia!" He dropped to his knees, turned her gently. Her breath was faint, shallow. Her eyelids fluttered, her pulse, a whisper beneath her jaw. Evan's hands moved without thought. Years of training surged up like muscle memory. He reached for the glucagon injector in the emergency drawer, but it wasn't in its place. Gone. No time. He grabbed a towel, soaked it in cold water, cradled her. Ruger sat behind him, breathing heavy, his paw still bloodied from tearing at the door. "You knew," Evan whispered. "You knew." He fumbled in the drawer again. Finally, a second injector, sealed. He tore the cap off, stuck the needle into her thigh, and prayed. The silence after was unbearable. Evan rocked her, whispering things he didn't remember, songs from when she was a baby, names of butterflies she loved, her mother's lullaby. "Stay with me, kiddo. Please. Daddy's here. Daddy's sorry." Ruger laid his head beside them both, unmoving. 10 minutes passed. Then a cough, barely there. Amelia stirred, lips parting. "Ruger!" Evan broke. He carried her to the couch, wrapped her in blankets, and checked her vitals as the monitor finally flickered back online. Still weak, but stabilizing. The door creaked open behind him. Ruger stood there, chest heaving. Blood still oozed from his paw. Evan didn't say a word. He walked over, knelt, and cupped the dog's face with both hands. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I should have listened." Ruger didn't flinch, just leaned his head into Evan's palms. It was then Evan saw it. The trace of a paw print, smeared in blood on the hallway floor, and beneath it, Amelia's door key. Not where it should have been, dropped, or taken, or placed. He picked it up slowly. Amelia watched Ruger and watched the front door, because suddenly the quiet of the ranch didn't feel safe, not anymore. And as the first gray light of dawn slid across the wooden floorboards, Evan finally understood. The dog hadn't just saved Amelia's life. He had been trying to tell him something for days, and Evan, blind in grief, deaf in logic, had silenced the one voice that never lied. The house had gone quiet again, not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that followed sirens and questions and oxygen masks. The kind of silence that lingered after fear had taken root and refused to leave. Evan sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the house pressing down on him. His left hand trembled slightly over the trackpad of the old laptop. The glow from the screen painted his face in shifting shades of blue. He hadn't touched the security footage in months, not since before Madeline arrived. But now he had no choice. Ruger lay at Evan's feet, his bandaged paw twitching each time the speakers clicked or the timeline scrolled. "All right, buddy," Evan whispered. "Let's find out." He clicked March 22nd, 7:12 p.m. The living room. Amelia had been curled up in her reading chair with Ruger at her side. Her laugh echoed faintly, muffled in the recording. Then Madeline entered frame, carrying the medicine tray. Evan paused, zoomed in. Something's off. Her hands moved quickly, too quickly. She bent down to give Amelia her evening meds, but before doing so, she reached into her coat pocket. A small vial, clear, unlabeled, not from the house. His stomach tightened. God. He jumped to another angle. Kitchen, 7:15 p.m. There she was again. Madeline opened the medicine drawer, looked behind her once, then switched out a labeled insulin vial with the one she brought. No hesitation, just clinical precision. Evan sat back, breath stolen from his lungs. She had known the cameras were there, and she hadn't cared. He looked down. Ruger was staring up at him, unmoving. "You knew." The dog blinked slowly, a pause, then lowered his head to the floor like the burden wasn't his to carry anymore. Evan stood. Adrenaline surged through his veins. Not the firefighting kind, not the heroic kind. The kind that comes when you realize someone had tried to kill your child, and you invited them in. He copied the footage onto a thumb drive, the label, "For Sheriff Moore, urgent." He didn't slam doors, didn't shout, just moved with the eerie calm of a man who'd walked through fires and finally knew where the flames started. He reached for his phone and hit speed dial. A sleepy voice answered. "Sheriff Moore, who is this?" "Evan Barrett." A pause. "Everything all right?" "No, I have footage."
"She's stable because of my dog."
"Send me the footage, I'll be there in 20. The night outside had a bitter edge. Evan opened the front door and let the wind sting his face, let the frost bite into his skin. Ruger stepped beside him. They both stared into the dark road winding up to the ranch. "I'm sorry," Evan said, voice raw. "I told you to stop barking. I locked you outside." Ruger didn't move, just stood there, his quiet presence heavier than any apology could fill. "You saved her again." The old dog's tail moved once, a soft thump against the porch wood. It was enough. Inside, Evan pulled out a box of old letters from beneath the floorboard of his bedroom, notes from his wife, sketches Amelia had drawn, pages of things he thought he'd one day show someone who loved their family the way he loved his. But somewhere along the way, his grief had clouded judgment. He had looked for help and found harm, and it was Ruger, not instinct, not memory, who had kept them from crossing the line between fear and finality. Evan placed the drive in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote in block letters, "To Sheriff Moore. Evidence." He left it on the entry table. A knock came at 2:11 a.m. Evan handed him the envelope. Ruger stood between them, watchful. "I want her found," Evan said. "She will be," Moore replied, "and not quietly." The sheriff gave a single nod, then left. That night, Evan didn't sleep. He sat by Amelia's side, watched her breathe, and every so often looked toward the hallway, where Ruger waited. Still, unblinking, watching not for shadows, but for silence. Because sometimes it was the quiet that tried to kill you, and sometimes it was a dog who never barked until it mattered most. The snow that morning came down in restless gusts, not heavy but insistent, like a whisper that wouldn't stop repeating itself. The wind scraped across the windows of the ranch house, and the shutters rattled with an anxious rhythm. Evan didn't notice the cold. He stood in the entryway, unmoving, staring at the wide front door Sheriff Moore had exited through just hours earlier. Ruger sat beside him, still as a statue, eyes locked on the horizon, as if watching something neither of them could yet see. By noon, the call came in. Madeline was gone, vanished. A neighbor had seen her car speed down the access road just after midnight. No taillights, no headlights, just the silhouette of a vehicle swallowed by the woods. Deputies searched the foothills, sent dogs into the creek beds, even flew a chopper once the weather cleared. But there was no sign of her, no footprints, no discarded coat, not even the vial she used to switch. Stretched thin, then thinner. He sat at the edge of the couch, head bowed, hands open in his lap like he was waiting to receive something that wouldn't come. Ruger paced the hallway. His nails clicked softly against the wooden floor, back and forth, not frantic, but methodical, measured, alert, like he was still tracking her scent in the invisible corners of the house. He paused by Amelia's door, sniffed the edge of the frame, stared at it, then kept pacing. Evan watched him from the living room. The guilt was thicker than the shadows pooling at his feet. He stood slowly and followed Ruger down the hall. The dog didn't look back, didn't acknowledge him. When Evan reached the nursery door, Ruger had already taken his usual place beside Amelia's bed. She was fast asleep, Her small hand curled against his flank, as if her body somehow knew it owed him more than breath. Evan lowered himself to the floor. The wood was cold against his knees. He didn't speak at first, just sat there, head bowed, watching the slow rise and fall of Ruger's chest. Finally, he whispered, "I should have trusted you." Ruger didn't move. "I heard you bark. I saw you refuse to eat. I watched you scratch at the drawer, and I still locked you outside." His voice cracked. "I locked out the only one who saw the truth." Ruger turned his head then, just slightly, and looked at him. Not with blame, not with pride, but with a quiet that held everything in between. Evan reached out slowly and rested his hand on Ruger's paw. "I'm sorry," he said, voice hoarse. "I don't deserve you." And in that moment Ruger did something he hadn't done since the day Evan brought him home. He leaned forward and gently touched his forehead to Evan's. Not a lick, not a whimper, just contact, weightless and full. Outside, the storm had faded into a dull hush. The world, for now, was still. But Ruger stayed beside the door long after Evan returned to the couch. His eyes never closed. And somewhere in that deep animal silence, Evan understood. The dog was waiting. Madeline hadn't run far, not in Ruger's mind. She had left something behind, something unfinished. And Ruger would not rest until it was over. The next morning, Evan walked to the barn and opened every drawer. He found the old harness he thought he'd thrown out. The tag still read, Ruger, K9 unit number 44. He dusted it off. "Maybe," he whispered, "you're not done being a working dog." Ruger stepped forward, quiet, calm, and when Evan lowered the harness, the dog let him buckle it on. Not as a symbol, but as a vow. It began with a growl. Not the carry, where the ticking clock sounds louder than breath, and even the walls seemed to sleep. But Ruger didn't. And he wasn't looking at shadows. His ears were sharpened forward, nose twitching in near imperceptible motion. Then his body tensed, fully, violently. His haunches dropped, claws scraping the floor. Then came the second sound, a click. From outside, like a hand brushing a doorknob that shouldn't be touched. Then another, this one sharper, metal on metal. Ruger launched. In a split second the German shepherd, still bearing the lean, fast muscle of his K9 past, charged down the hallway, barking with a force that rattled the nursery windows. Amelia stirred. Evan's eyes flew open. He sat bolt upright in bed just as the sound of shattering glass cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. He didn't need time to think. He already knew. Madeline was back. By the time Evan reached the front of the house, Ruger had already crashed through the lower pane of the mudroom door, glass glinting like ice beneath his paws. He stood guard at the threshold, blood streaking one shoulder from the shards, but he didn't flinch. He growled again, low, deliberate. Evan's voice came out as a rasp. "Ruger, heel!" But Ruger didn't move. Then Evan saw her. Madeline. She stood just beyond the porch, bathed in moonlight, face pale and wild, strands of hair sticking to her damp forehead. Her coat was torn, one shoe missing. She held something in her hand, a syringe. Not this time, Evan thought. His heart thudded against his ribs like fists on a locked door. "Don't move!" he shouted, stepping onto the broken threshold. "Madeline, drop it!" But she didn't drop it. She smiled. "I came to say goodbye," she whispered. Her voice didn't match her face. Too calm, too rehearsed. Evan's body moved faster than his thoughts. He reached for the emergency flashlight beside the doorframe, hurled it. It struck her wrist, hard. The syringe clattered to the ground. In that instant, Ruger lunged. Not toward her throat, not as a killer, but straight for her hand. He pinned her wrist into the dirt, teeth grazing skin without breaking it, his body atop hers, pressing down with the full weight of judgment. She screamed, not from pain, but panic. She kicked, flailed, but Ruger didn't budge. Evan ran toward them, grabbing the porch phone on his way out, already dialing. "Sheriff Moore," he panted into the line. "She's here. Ruger has her." 10 minutes later, the house was alive, with red and blue strobes cutting through the dark. Amelia peeked from her window, confused but safe. Sheriff Moore handcuffed Madeline with professional calm, her face ashen now, all madness drained. Before they took her away, Evan looked her in the eye. "Why?" he asked. "Why come back?" "Into the back seat." Ruger stood beside Evan, blood drying on his fur, chest rising and falling with quiet steadiness. The sheriff turned back once before driving off. If he hadn't sensed her, it would have been too late. Evan nodded. His throat was thick with what-ifs. That night, Evan didn't sleep. He bandaged Ruger's shoulder with shaking hands, whispering thanks between every tug of gauze. "I didn't hear her. I didn't feel it. But you did." Ruger watched him with those steady, ageless eyes. Evan pressed his forehead to Ruger's and closed his eyes. "Never again," he whispered. The dog exhaled deeply, finally lying down, his body stretched beside Amelia's door once more. The storm was over, but the house would never be the same. Not because of the damage, but because love had once again proven its sharpest edge wasn't softness, it was instinct, earned through pain, tested through fire, and forever etched into bone. The shadows returned silently that night, folding softly into the corners of Amelia's room, draping themselves across the floor in ghostly ribbons of moonlight. Ruger lay stretched beside the foot of her bed, a quiet guardian whose breath matched the rhythmic rise and fall of the small girl's chest. A peaceful night, deceptive in its calmness, masking the tension still woven through their lives like invisible thread. Evan sat downstairs in the living room, staring blankly at the cold cup of coffee clasped loosely between his hands. Sleep had become elusive, a distant luxury. Too many close calls, too many what-ifs still haunted his mind. But tonight felt different somehow. A gentle quiet had descended upon their ranch, settling like dust in the old corners. Then came the sound. A creak, subtle but unmistakable, floated from the direction of the back door. Evan's spine straightened. He placed his coffee down and listened, his pulse quickening when he heard the faint shuffle of feet. He stood slowly, silently, the old firefighter instincts crackling to life beneath his skin. His heart beat sharply, not from fear, but a deep, instinctual sense of dread. Someone was inside their home. "Amelia," Evan whispered, her name a quiet prayer as he moved toward the stairs. His legs felt strangely heavy, his mind flickering through the horrible possibilities. He took the steps, 2 at a time, hissed, the words trembling from her lips. Amelia stared up at Madeline, eyes wide and frozen with confusion and fear. She clutched tightly at her blankets, mouth moving soundlessly, trapped in the paralysis of terror. "No!" Evan's voice caught in his throat as Ruger moved, a blur of muscle and fur lunging toward Madeline, teeth bared in protective fury. The next moments unraveled in slow, dreadful clarity. Madeline swung the metal rod with desperate, ruthless force. It connected with a sickening sound, a dull thud against Ruger's side. Blood sprayed the wall, painting a crimson arc across Amelia's drawings pinned beside her bed. The German shepherd yelped, a wrenching, raw sound that tore at Evan's soul. Ruger crumpled, his body twisting, paws scrambling against the wooden floor, eyes wide in pain, yet still fixed defiantly on Madeline. "No!" Amelia screamed, her voice finally breaking free of shock, raw with agony. Madeline stumbled back, momentarily stunned by her own brutality. Her gaze flicked wildly from the wounded dog to the child, her breaths coming in rapid, panicked bursts. Ruger struggled back onto his trembling legs, blood pooling beneath him, his growls reduced to weakened rasps. Yet his body was still a barrier between Madeline and Amelia. Evan surged forward, his vision narrowing down to a pinpoint of rage and fear, crashing through the doorway like a hurricane. He grabbed Madeline's arm roughly, wrenching the weapon from her grasp and sending it clattering across the room. "You will never touch her again." Evan's voice was ice, deep and dangerous. Madeline fought back, scratching and clawing at him in frantic desperation. But Evan held her firmly, his strength sharpened by the raw instinct to protect his child. "Why couldn't you just let me go?" she shrieked, tears now streaming down her twisted face. Her voice cracked under the strain. "I had nowhere left. Nowhere." Evan felt no pity, only a deep well of cold anger. He dragged Madeline toward the doorway, calling down to his phone on the table below, shouting for the sheriff's deputies who had been keeping watch from a distance. Boots thundered up the porch steps, deputies streaming into the room moments later. Madeline collapsed limply into their hold, sobbing, her fury extinguished into broken resignation. The room fell quiet again, a deafening, hollow silence. Evan turned back slowly, dread pooling like ice water in his stomach. Amelia had slipped from her bed and crawled toward Ruger, her little hands desperately pressing against his blood-matted fur. "Daddy," she choked out, her voice breaking in terror, eyes glistening with panic. "You did good. You protected her." Ruger's gaze lifted slowly, meeting Evan's with a quiet, understanding resolve. He tried to move closer to Amelia, his head dropping softly into her small lap. Her hands cradled his face, tears falling freely onto his fur. "You're my hero, Ruger," Amelia whispered fiercely, her small frame shook with emotion, grief too large for her tiny shoulders. "Please, stay with me, please." The deputies carefully lifted Madeline, carrying her away as Evan gently wrapped Ruger's wounds, pressing towels against the seeping blood. He knew they didn't have long. Every second mattered now. Ruger's pulse fluttered beneath Evan's touch, faint yet steady, a whisper of life fighting bravely against the darkness. Evan lifted his gaze to Amelia, his heart aching at the sight of her tear-streaked face, her pale skin illuminated softly by the moonlight. "We won't let anything happen to him," he promised firmly, voice steady despite the tremble in his soul. "I swear it." And as the sirens wailed in the distance, their mournful sound piercing through the night silence, Evan knew the battle wasn't over yet. They had survived the blow, but the hardest part, he feared, was yet to come. The veterinary recovery room smelled of antiseptic and lavender, Dr. Sanderson's gentle nod to the families who paced these tiled floors long after midnight. Machines hummed in muted rhythm. IV bags swayed like silent metronomes. The windows, fogged by the chill of early dawn, reflected the faintest blush of rose gold creeping up the sky. Amelia sat curled in a green vinyl chair, pulled tight to Ruger's steel-framed cot. Her wheelchair rested a breath behind her, forgotten for the moment. Bandages wrapped Ruger's flank and shoulder in stark white layers, tinged pale pink where the sutures exhaled their worry. Tubes fed him fluids. Monitors traced the fragile song of his heart. Everything about the German shepherd, once so vast, so invincible, now seemed impossibly small beneath the tangle of wires. Amelia's palm lay flat against Ruger's chest, just above the steady mechanical hiss of oxygen. Her fingers were dwarfed by the breadth of him, yet they trembled with an authority born of fierce devotion. She counted the seconds between each rise and fall, pressing softly, as though willing her own pulse into his. "Daddy says heroes rest," she whispered, voice raw from tears that still clung like salt on her cheeks. "But you've rested enough, Ruger. Please, wake up." The beeping beside her ticked on. 71, 72. A modest climb, but Amelia clung to it like a lifeline. She leaned closer, curls brushing the thin fur over his ear. "Remember when we pretended the meadow was an ocean and you were my boat? I need my boat again." But faint streaks still ghosted beneath his nails. The ache in his ribs had nothing to do with bruises. It was the crushing weight of regret. The memory of Ruger's yelp as metal met flesh, of crimson staining Amelia's drawings. He watched his daughter now, so impossibly small, pouring every fragment of hope into the dog who had bled for her. Dr. Sanderson stepped up quietly, clipboard tucked against her chest. "Vitals are plateauing," she murmured. "That's good. The transfusion's holding. Is he in pain?" Amelia asked without looking away. "We're keeping him comfortable, sweetheart. His body just needs time." Amelia nodded, but her hand never left Ruger's heart. Minutes passed, perhaps hours. It was difficult to mark time in a room where only machines moved. Outside, a lone robin trilled tentative notes, testing the first warmth of spring. The song drifted through the cracked window and settled over them like a fragile promise. Amelia closed her eyes and hummed along, soft, shaky. Ruger's ears flicked. The motion was so slight she almost missed it. Her breath caught. She pressed closer. "Ruger?" Another flick, a twitch at the edge of his paw. Amelia's heart lurched. She turned, eyes wide, meeting her father's startled gaze through the glass. Evan's hand lifted unconsciously, pressed flat against the barrier as though he could push his will into the room. Trembling, Amelia laid both palms on Ruger's chest. The monitors quickened, 74, 75. His nostrils flared, drawing a deeper breath. Then his eyelids fluttered once, twice, each flutter a thunderclap in Amelia's chest. "Ruger, it's me," she breathed, tears spilling anew, though this time each droplet carried the sweetness of possibility. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, one amber eye cracked open. Unfocused at first, the gaze drifted across the sterile ceiling, then down, anchoring on the girl half-folded over him. Recognition unfurled like dawn over distant hills. His tail didn't wag, it was still bound for stability, but a faint thump of muscle against mattress said enough. Amelia released a sob that was half laughter. "Daddy, he's awake!" Evan burst through the door before Dr. Sanderson could caution quiet. His boots scuffed the tile, stopping just short of Amelia's chair. The tension in his shoulders melted into trembling relief as he knelt beside them. "Hey, partner," he whispered, voice fracturing under the weight of gratitude. He reached, resting broad calloused fingers against Ruger's good shoulder. "You came back." Ruger's gaze shifted, landing on Evan. A faint twitch of brow, a slow blink. "Yes, I'm here. Don't worry." Then his paw lifted, do a lot. But love does the heavier lifting. Evan's eyes never left Ruger's. "We're not losing him," he said. More vow than statement. Ruger's breaths came easier now. The tension of pain still etched his brow, but his eyes held a quiet fire. The same quiet that had growled warnings, that had shattered glass to protect the little girl, now anchoring him to life. Amelia lifted her head. "I told you," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Ruger's muzzle. "Heroes never quit." Her fingers traced the patch of fur above his heart. Beneath the gauze, that heart had slowed, had faltered, but it had not stopped. And now, as morning light spilled across the room, it beat in stubborn harmony with hers. Evan pressed a kiss to Amelia's temple, another to Ruger's brow. "Rest, both of you," he murmured. "The worst is over." Maybe it was. The law would handle Madeline. The barn could be rebuilt. But what mattered now was the fragile circle of breath and heartbeat and whispered hope knitted together on that narrow cot. Amelia leaned back only when Ruger's eyes drifted closed again, not in surrender, but in trust. She stayed there, her tiny hand rising and falling with the cadence of his chest, counting each breath the way one counts blessings. Evan remained at her side, his presence a wall against lingering shadows. Outside, sunrise finally breached the horizon, bathing the windows in gold. And inside, in that small room smelling of lavender and antiseptic, 3 hearts beat, slow, resilient, entwined, as the first day of their healing began. The farmhouse had learned a softer vocabulary in the weeks since the break-in. Even the floorboards, once so quick to complain beneath hurried footsteps, now murmured in hushed tones, as though the whole place understood that healing never comes when the world is loud. It was just past 4 a.m. when Evan slipped from the bedroom. Dawn hovered somewhere beyond the eastern ridge, slow and uncertain, dimming the stars by fractions. He padded barefoot through the hallway, surrendered to the silence the same way a penitent kneels beneath stained glass light. From Amelia's door drifted the steady metronome of sleep, her breath, Ruger's breath, the rhythmic sigh of the oxygen concentrator Dr. Sanderson insisted keep running overnight, just in case. Evan paused to listen. 1, 2, 3 hearts, still beating in patient harmony. Garden only she might tend. He sat creaking the chair just enough to remind the world he was still here, and opened the book to a fresh page. The paper smelled faintly of rosemary and smoke, 2 scents that would always mean home. April 27, 5:03 a.m. Lottie, the house is finally quiet enough to write you without fear of interruption. Ruger is asleep beside Amelia's bed again. Dr. Sanderson says the stitches can come out next week if the wounds stay clean. I keep thinking about the moment his eyes opened, how he looked at Amelia first, then me, as if he wanted to make sure the world was back in its rightful order. The vet called it remarkable resilience. I call it devotion you could build a cathedral around. Evan paused, the nib of his fountain pen hovering above the page. A log shifted quietly in the wood stove behind him, reshaping heat. He thought of how Charlotte used to write late into the night, notes to friends, grocery lists, prayers folded into recipe margins. He'd teased her once that parchment and ink were heavy things to drag into heaven. She'd smiled and told him heaven always had room for words. Tonight, he hoped she was right. You would have loved him, Lottie. Not just the way he protects Amelia, but the way he listens. Really listens when she tells him stories. He rests his head on her lap as though her voice alone could stitch the world together. And maybe it can. She painted new wings on his harness yesterday, bright gold this time. Said the old ones faded after all that fighting bad dreams. Funny how she never once calls Madeline by name, only the nightmare. Children know how to name monsters properly, I guess. He flipped back a few pages. Entries written in shaky scrawl the night Ruger barreled through shattered glass. Another penned in jagged block letters after the emergency surgery. The ink blotches there reminded him of blood, thick and permanent. Those pages would never read soft, but they were truth, and truth had no dress clothes. On the windowsill above the sink sat a simple clay pot where Charlotte's African violet still bloomed. Soft purple petals, velvet to the touch, defying the cold drafts that sneaked in around old window frames. He touched the leaf gently, alive, still fighting like everything else worth loving. He returned to the journal, words flowing with the warmth of coffee that had long gone cold. Do you remember the summer Ruger's namesake, that old rifle-toting ranger, told us, "Courage is just love on patrol"? It sounded like frontier poetry then. Now I see it nightly, a dog with stitches tight across his ribs, refusing to sleep more than a heartbeat away from our daughter. Learn not to bet against faith with teeth. Evan's handwriting slowed. The next sentence seemed to weigh more than ink could hold. Forgive me for the nights I doubted him, doubted her, doubted myself most of all, for locking the door when the only alarm I needed was already barking his warning. A tear blurred the last word. He brushed it away with a thumb that smelled faintly of sawdust and antiseptic. He felt Charlotte in these confessions, felt her patient silence, the way she always left space for him to unravel, without judgment. The first pale light of dawn crept across the counter. It kissed the violet's petals, turned them almost translucent. Evan capped the pen, closed the journal, and bound it with a fraying ribbon Amelia had tied around it months ago. Sky blue, her mother's favorite color. He crossed the kitchen to the window. Outside, the pasture glimmered with dew, each blade catching sunrise like tiny mirrors. He set the journal on the sill beside the violet, angled so the light spilled across its cover. Charlotte's space, where words meet roots. Keep watch, he whispered to the journal, to her, like you always did. Footsteps padded softly in the hallway. Amelia's morning shuffle of wheels and blankets. Ruger's nails followed, a slow percussion of loyalty. Evan turned, just as they appeared in the doorway. Amelia wrapped in a quilt, Ruger at her side, moving tenderly, but without hesitation. The dog's amber eyes found the journal, then Evan's. A silent exchange, acknowledgement, perhaps approval. Writing to Mom again? Amelia asked, voice still husky with sleep. Yeah, Evan said, crossing the room to lift her into his arms. Telling her how proud she'd be of both of you. Amelia rested her head on his shoulder, gaze drifting to the windowsill. She can read them, right? Even in heaven? I think she never misses a word, Evan answered, kissing Amelia's temple. At their feet Ruger sat, tail sweeping once across the worn floorboards. Dawnlight washed over them, pooling at the violet, glinting off the ribbon, like a strand of sky brought indoors. In that quiet glow, 3 hearts beat together, one remembered, 2 still fighting, and the house exhaled, its silence now a blessing rather than a weight. He imagined Charlotte's laughter on the breeze, imagined Ruger's bark chasing butterflies, imagined Amelia's first unsteady step, braced by love and steel.
The first Saturday in months that felt wholly ordinary, and for that reason alone miraculous. Amelia sat cross-legged on a quilt in the center of the room, a circle of flashcards spread like playing pieces around her knees. Ruger lay opposite her, enormous paws extended, stitches removed but pink scars still evident beneath the thinning fur. A brand-new therapy harness, sky blue to match the ribbon on Evan's journal, wrapped his torso in supportive bands. An elastic leash clipped to a ceiling-mounted pulley gave just enough slack for movement, while preventing any sudden, over-eager leaps. Evan watched from the doorway, arms folded, an amused smile hiding behind the edge of a coffee mug. This was Amelia's idea. Teach Ruger to hear secrets. She claimed dogs already understood the loud world. It was time they learned the quiet one, too. "Ready, Captain?" she whispered, barely louder than a moth's flutter. Ruger's ears twitched, nose angling forward. Amelia held up the first card, hand-painted in crayon with a yellow sun and the word, light. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling absolute silence, and mouthed the syllable, light. Nothing. Ruger blinked, then licked the corner of his scarred shoulder, more interested in the lingering scent of antiseptic than synesthetic vocabulary. Amelia giggled, but covered her mouth, determined to preserve the hush. She set light aside and lifted the second card, a drawn heart. The letters read, love. Again, a soundless articulation. Love. Ruger tilted his head. His tail twitched once, unsure. From the doorway, Evan spoke in a normal tone. "Try the one you practiced yesterday." Amelia's face lit with conspiratorial delight. She shuffled until she found the card she'd tucked beneath her quilt for safekeeping. A green shield with the word safe painted across it in brave, blocky strokes. She exhaled slowly, leaned closer, and whispered, "Safe." The response was immediate. Ruger's tail thumped, a soft, enthusiastic rhythm against the quilt. His ears perked, his gaze fixed on Amelia with rapt attention. Another whisper, "Safe, Ruger." A second tail thump, a gentle whine of acknowledgement. Evan's chest tightened at how simple the magic was, a single word that rang deeper than any command. He set his mug aside, stepping into the room. Amelia lowered the card. "He remembers," she breathed. "It's our code." Evan knelt behind Ruger, checking the harness straps. "Code's good. Let's see if he'll walk to it." Amelia scooted back a few inches and made a path between stacked couch cushions, her improvised obstacle course. She held out her hand like a conductor about to cue strings, then whispered. Dog accepted it without breaking eye contact with Amelia. Step, a wobble, another step. The pulley gave a muted hiss as the elastic leash stretched forward, then recoiled ever so slightly to help balance Ruger's stance. He reached the first pillow mountain, sniffed, and navigated around it with shaky determination. Amelia's smile widened, eyes bright with unfiltered joy. "Safe," she repeated, softer still, as though volume was a currency her heart could not afford to waste. Halfway across the course, Ruger paused, panting lightly. Evan crouched, watching for any sign of pain, ready to lift if necessary. But Ruger glanced back at him with quiet resolve, then resumed, each step surer than the last. He crossed the final pillow and lowered himself onto the quilt beside Amelia, exhaling a deep, satisfied huff. Amelia threw her arms around his neck, careful not to jostle the healing wounds, and rested her forehead against his. "You did it," she whispered, tears glittering in the sunbeams. "You're safe." Thump, thump, tail against floorboards. Evan swallowed the knot rising in his throat. The pulleys overhead clicked as they retracted the slack, ready for next time, a silent promise of many more steps to come. "Mind if I borrow a turn?" Evan asked. Amelia looked up, cheeks flushed. "Daddy wants to learn the secret word." "I already know the word," he said, sitting cross-legged opposite her. He tapped his chest. "But you need to teach me the whisper part." She nodded gravely, handing him the safe card as if bestowing a knighthood. Evan leaned forward, cupped his hand near Ruger's ear, and released a breath more than a word, the gentlest current of air shaped around that four-letter vowel. "Safe." Ruger's response was immediate. His head nudged into Evan's palm, eyes half-closing in trust. Evan chuckled, the sound brittle with emotion. "Works on dads, too, apparently." They spent the next hour playing the whisper game, each round a lesson in patience and incremental courage. Sometimes Ruger managed 5 steps, sometimes only 2, before fatigue insisted on rest. Every success, no matter how small, was celebrated with the quiet clapping of fingertips against palms. Amelia's invention to keep the room hushed. Ruger soon learned that the faintest brush of her hands meant triumph. Mid-morning, sunlight reached its full gleam across the floor. The lilacs on the mantel shed a fresh drift of petals that floated down like confetti, settling in Ruger's fur and Amelia's lap. Evan watched her pluck one violet shard, tuck it behind the dog's ear, and whisper again. "Safe," she said, nearly inaudible. Ruger lifted his head, gave a single authoritative bark, a joyful crack in the silence that made both Evan and Amelia jump, then laugh in startled delight. The bark seemed to claim the house anew, filling every rafter with the echo of life, telling us he's ready for louder words. "Maybe," she said, brushing tears she wouldn't admit were there. "Or maybe he's telling us we're safe, too." Evan glanced toward the windowsill, where the leather journal rested beside Charlotte's violet, its petals unfazed by time or trials. He thought of the lines he had written hours earlier, of courage on patrol and cathedrals built from devotion. In that moment, with his daughter's laughter mingling with a dog's victorious bark, he felt Charlotte everywhere, the smell of lilac, the hush of dawn, the resilient bloom of hope. Ruger settled again, panting happily. Amelia leaned against his shoulder, exhaustion tugging at her eyelids, but joy still dancing on her lips. Evan placed a gentle hand on both their backs, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath fur and the delicate flutter beneath quilt. Safe. The word was small, almost weightless, but it filled the room like a hymn. And for the first time in a long, long while, Evan believed in it completely. The late afternoon sun slanted across the kitchen, turning the dust motes into slow-moving constellations. Evan stood at the sink, rinsing paintbrushes. Amelia's blues and golds swirled together in the water, becoming some new, unnamed color. Behind him, Ruger dozed beneath the table, bandaged flank rising and falling, tail ticking softly whenever Amelia's voice drifted down the hallway. The phone rang. Not the tinny jingle of the landline they kept for emergencies, but the sharp trill of Evan's cell, still unfamiliar in this old house.
He wiped his hands on a rag and answered out of habit more than desire. Barrett residence. A woman's voice, crisp, practiced, filled the kitchen. Mr. Evan Barrett? This is Karen Rowe with the Office of the Governor. I'm calling to congratulate your daughter and her service dog on their nomination for the Montana Star of Courage. Evan's back straightened. His gaze flicked to the hallway, where Amelia's laughter mingled with the creak of her wheelchair. I wasn't aware of any nomination, he said slowly. The committee convened yesterday. Local law enforcement submitted the report. Your daughter's bravery under threat, Mr. Barrett, and Ruger's life-saving actions. The public response has been overwhelming. Press outlets are requesting interviews. We'd like to invite you all to Helena next month to accept the medal in person. Evan pressed a hand against the counter, palm cold. The image burst unbidden, flashbulbs popping, microphones thrust toward Amelia's face. Ruger forced into a photo line while strangers reached for his scars. The very idea felt like a second wound.
Costs, therapy animals, even scholarships, thank you, Evan cut in, softer now. But my daughter's recovery doesn't need cameras, she needs quiet. He ended the call before courtesy weakened his resolve. The phone rang again almost immediately, another unknown number, then another. Evan turned it off, set it face down on the table, and exhaled. The house seemed to listen, walls leaning closer. Footsteps rolled down the hallway. Amelia appeared in the doorway, paint smudged across her cheek like war paint. "Who was that?" she asked, tucking a curl behind her ear. Evan knelt to meet her eye. "Reporters. They want to talk about Ruger, about you." Her brows puckered. "But it's our story day, not theirs." "I know." He brushed the paint from her skin with his thumb. "I said no." She tilted her head, studying him the way her mother once did, when truth hid between his words. "Is it because you're scared?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "Maybe a little," he admitted. "Mostly I'm tired of strangers deciding what parts of us are worth telling." Amelia glanced at Ruger, who had lifted his head, ears pitched forward. She rolled closer, placed a hand on his fur, safe. "What if we just didn't answer the phone anymore?" she suggested, voice light but firm. "What if we went to the meadow instead?" Evan's chest tightened. He looked past her through the window, saw the distant hill where wildflowers had begun their slow uprising, purple splashes against the green, the same colors Charlotte used to weave into table wreaths. The meadow was Charlotte's cathedral, Ruger's playground, Amelia's dream, and his refuge. "I think," he said, rising, "that's the best idea I've heard in a long while." They packed lightly, a thermos of lemonade, half a loaf of sourdough, slices of apple, and a blanket, faded by summers of picnics now blurred in memory. Evan loaded Amelia's chair onto the back of the ATV, secured Ruger's harness to a short lead so strain wouldn't reopen the healing tissue. The late-day light dripped through cottonwoods as they bumped along the narrow service road, the tires kicking up the scent of damp earth and pine. When the meadow opened before them, an ocean of swaying color, Amelia sucked in a delighted breath. "It's taller than last year." "Everything grows when no one's looking," Evan said, unslinging her chair. He lifted her into the seat. Ruger trotted ahead, muzzle brushing grasses heavy with pollen. Tiny white butterflies fluttered around him, startled into flight by his lumbering joy. They reached the center clearing, where the ground flattened into a natural quilt of bloom and moss. Evan spread the blanket. Ruger lowered himself carefully, front legs straight, hindquarters easing in a stub of charcoal. "But it's secret until it's done." She stuck the charcoal between her teeth impishly and began to sketch broad strokes.
two rising shapes, a horizon line. Ruger watched every mark, tail thumping a slow metronome. Evan reclined on an elbow, letting a wind comb his hair. The sky overhead stretched unblemished, a bowl of pale blue. Somewhere in that wide silence, his thoughts drifted to Charlotte. "They asked to give our daughter a medal," he told the wind, "but she'd rather be here, right where you used to lie with her in your arms." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, Amelia had set aside the charcoal. She lifted a water brush, dipped it into lemon water, and spread yellow across her canvas in sweeping arcs. Ruger's nose twitched. He leaned closer, sniffing, then licked the corner of the paper, leaving a tiny wet spot that made Amelia giggle. "It's okay," she whispered to him. "You're part of it now." She paused, looked up at Evan. "Daddy, what's the opposite of a reporter?" He considered. "Someone who listens and keeps the story safe." She nodded, satisfied. "Then Ruger's the opposite of a reporter." The breeze quickened, bending flowers toward them as if in agreement. Amelia set her brush down, ran fingers through Ruger's fur. "Do you think they'll keep calling?" "Probably," Evan admitted. "Will you keep saying no?" He reached out, squeezed her hand. "If that's what you want." She glanced toward the horizon, where the sun had begun its slow descent, spilling gold like loose change. "I only want the meadow," she said, then added with a shy smile, "and maybe a picnic tomorrow, too." Evan laughed, the sound foreign and welcome in his throat. "Consider it scheduled." Ruger settled his head in Amelia's lap, a living weight, a vow wrapped in fur. He closed his eyes, content. The award, the cameras, the unending noise of other people's definitions, none of it reached them here. Evan lay back, feeling the earth beneath his spine, the sky domed above. Breathed in lilac, grass, the faint musk of dog. He listened to the whisper of Amelia's brush starting a new line, the steady rumble of Ruger's satisfied sigh, and somewhere beyond sight, the phone on the kitchen counter rang once more, its shrill voice swallowed whole by miles of quiet field and the unshakable choice of a family that refused to let strangers author their peace. Spring cracked wide open on a Tuesday. Dawn painted lilac stripes across the farmhouse kitchen as Evan packed a picnic basket the way Charlotte used to. Turkey sandwiches cut on the bias, honey-crisp apple slices, a mason jar of lemonade, and the frayed quilt that carried a decade of whispered vows. Ruger, gray-muzzled German Shepherd, back door, and nudged. "Open, let's go." Upstairs, 11-year-old Amelia brushed curls in her bedroom mirror, a daisy waiting on the dresser. She slid the flower behind her ear and turned wide-eyed. "The meadow's turning into a storybook," she said. "We've missed half the chapters." She spoke with the easy courage of someone who had already weathered fire and wheelchairs and the empty space where a mother's laugh used to live. Minutes later, they gathered on the porch ramp. Evan, tall and careful. Amelia, bundled in her chair. Ruger, positioning himself at her right, as if the old service harness still spanned his shoulders. Evan lashed the basket to the chair with bungee cords, double-knotted. Dawn's chill lingered, but the air smelled of cedar and thawed earth. Promise made tangible. The climb began along a gravel service road that shimmered with dew. Sunlight flickered through pine branches, dappling Amelia's blanket-covered knees. A rabbit darted. Ruger's ears twitched, yet he matched Amelia's wheels stride for measured stride. Halfway up, Evan paused, letting lungs and memories settle. Behind them, the farmhouse looked toy-small, violet glass glinting in the kitchen window. Winter wheat rippled gold and green, a valley breathing itself awake. Gravel softened to mossy soil.
Ruger's paw prints left delicate dents that glimmered with water before dissolving. Proof of perseverance, gone the moment it's made. Near the summit, wildflowers erupted, lupine blues, arrowleaf yellows, Indian paintbrush in brazen orange. At their center towered the lone ponderosa, Charlotte's tree, its branches flaring like a banner. Under that tree, Evan spread the quilt and lifted his daughter from her chair, minding the rigid brace hugging her spine. Ruger lowered himself with a soft grunt, sighing into the grass as Amelia ran fingers through blades tall enough to tickle her wrist. Larks burst from cover. Sunlight turned the daisy in her hair translucent. They ate in companionable silence, a father, a daughter, a dog stitched together by shared absence. Amelia fed Ruger slivers of sandwich, marveling at how gently the big jaws closed around her fingertips. When the apples were gone, she asked, "Daddy, do you think Mom can see us?" Evan followed her gaze beyond the pine's spire into unbroken blue. "The meadow is her postcard," he said. "Every spring she writes, 'I'm still here.'" Amelia accepted that quietly, the meadow's hush settling in her chest. Then she drew out a watercolor tin and pad, balanced them against Ruger's steady flank, and began to paint. The green ribbon of slope, a cobalt sky, a brown patch that was very clearly the dog beneath her brush. A glob of yellow spattered onto Ruger's nose. He sneezed. Afternoon, the light tipped westward. Evan packed the basket, folded the quilt, and wheeled Amelia down slope. Ruger's limp set a slow, dignified tempo, a metronome of resilience. Hawks carved silent signatures overhead, while petals brushed their ankles in rustling applause. For the first time since the fire had stolen Charlotte and smoke had choked their future, Evan felt the horizon draw nearer, as though it were inviting them to walk toward it, step by trembling step. A pale shaft of late afternoon sun slanted across the barn workshop, turning sawdust into flecks of gold. Evan knelt beside Amelia's chair, fastening the last Velcro strap of the custom leg braces he'd machined through 6 relentless months. Aluminum gleamed where the polish caught light, leather padding smelled of rain-dark chestnuts. Hinges bent forward only, never back, tested 1,000 rosy-eyed nights under Evan's own weight. Across the floor, Ruger sat quivering with eagerness inside his sky-blue therapy harness, gold swirls Amelia had painted curling along the leather. A side handle waited for her small hands. Evan exhaled. "First we stand," he said. "If anything hurts, we stop." Amelia's palms slid onto the handle, damp with hope. Evan rolled her chair back an inch, so her full weight settled into the braces. "On 3, he whispered. But before the count finished, Ruger rose and braced, and Amelia pulled. Muscles, long asleep, spasmed awake. Leather rustled, metal clicked. Air, cold, miraculous, slipped beneath her soles. She gasped, wobbling. Ruger adjusted, a silent interpreter of balance, and there she was, upright for the first time in years, tears suspending like stars before dawn. "I'm up," she breathed. Evan's heart thundered, but he kept his voice steady. "Shift some weight onto Ruger now." Her fingers tightened on the harness. With infinite caution, she drew her left leg forward. The knee hinge resisted, then yielded. A scuffed pink sneaker touched earth. 1 step. The barn exhaled. Creaking rafters, plucking hens, the world itself bending to witness. Ruger
met Evan's eyes. She did it, and no one toppled. Amelia's face lit in fierce joy. "Daddy, I can feel the ground." "Toward me," Evan said, backing toward the oak workbench. Step, pause, breath. Ruger flowed beside her like a living balustrade. 4 trembling steps brought her to the bench, where she leaned, amazed, enough to ache. Evan swore he would sand and tweak and polish until those braces felt like wings. For now he simply sat beside his daughter, an arm draped across Ruger's scarred shoulders, letting the warm hush fill every fracture in their lives. Evening's honey-colored light spilled across the floorboards, like an invitation no one needed to voice. Beyond the threshold, the meadow lay waiting, silent, expectant. Amelia rested a minute longer, lungs flittering as if they too were learning distance. Then she looked at her father, then at the open field. "Can we try one more?" she asked. Evan steadied her elbow. Ruger rose, muscles quaking but resolute. The handle stood like a promise. Barn air held its breath. Together girl and dog stood. No wobble, only shared tremor. Outside, wind combed the grass in approving hush. One step. Dust lifted. Evan's cheer caught in his throat, too loud for such holiness. 2 steps. Ruger halted at a patch of clover. Amelia stopped, chest rising fast. She turned her face to the breeze, hair whipped into gold strands. And for a suspended instant everything held. Balance, sunlight, the fragile miracle of standing horizon level with the world. She reached a free hand outward, caught a drifting seed flake, then let it go. Ruger did not move. He translated every shift of weight into stillness, every flicker of doubt into composure, steadier than earth ever pretended to be. Amelia laughed, soft and astonished. She looked at Evan across a slim distance that said more than words. "I see you. I see this." Fatigue tremored in her knees. Ruger felt it first, easing stance. Evan closed the gap and guided her back to the bench. When she sat, victory did not dim, it simply rested. Outside, swallows looped and cattle lowed somewhere in the valley. But up here, the silence felt cathedral high. Evan tugged a curl from Amelia's damp forehead and asked how she felt. "Like the sky is closer," she whispered. "It is." Ruger lay at her feet, eyelids half closed, tail giving one measured sweep. Amelia traced the raised scar she called brave line. No words were needed. Sun dissolved into lavender at the horizon, breeze ruffling hair and fur, cooling sweat on Evan's temples. The farmhouse phone rang far below, 3 unanswered pulses, then fell silent, irrelevant. Father, daughter, and dog formed a quiet triangle under the settling dark. Every wound, fire, loss, shattered bone, swallowed faith, met its counterforce in that Barrett, fresh-shaved, Sunday-best flannel, waited on the porch, nerves marching 2 beats, pride in his healing household, distrust of any spectacle that might reopen sutures barely knit. A dark sedan crested the lane, Montana's silver meadowlark glinting on its door. Governor Helen Maddox stepped out, steel-spined, school-teacher calm, velvet box cupped in both hands. Behind Evan, German Shepherd Ruger padded forward, scars easing beneath half-mended muscle. Amelia rolled beside him in her chair, daisies braided through the spokes, meadowgrass woven into the dog's ear so he doesn't look too official. "Mr. Barrett," the governor greeted, hand extended. Evan, he corrected, shaking once, firm, unadorned. Her gaze landed on the pair who mattered. And you must be Amelia. I hear you teach quiet words. Only to Ruger, Amelia replied. Grown-ups take longer. Laughter broke the formality. Maddox knelt, offering Ruger the back of her hand. The dog rested his chin there, acknowledgement, not ceremony. Rising, the governor opened the velvet box, a bronze courage medal, star ringed with laurel. No reporters, no cameras, she promised. Just the state, placing this where it belongs, then leaving you to your evening. Evan tensed. Awards can weigh heavier than wounds. Ruger doesn't need another burden. Amelia's steady voice cut through. May I do the pinning? Maddox offered the box. Father nodded. Ruger lowered himself so Amelia could reach the collar ring. She whispered one soft word, safe, and fastened the medal. Yard wind stilled, chickens hushed, as though the ranch itself bowed. The governor's eyes shimmered. Duty never looked so graceful. Amelia pivoted toward the hilltop meadow. Ruger already knows he's brave. I already know I'm safe. Could we plant a tree instead, so bravery can grow? Maddox's smile deepened into crow's feet. A ponderosa, then, your mother's favorite. I'll have a seedling delivered. She pressed a brass meadowlark pin into Amelia's palm. Courage often whispers. Amelia pinned the bird beside the medal, then hugged the governor, a swift sunrise of affection, before the woman returned to her car. Dust curled behind the sedan like a closing curtain. Tree idea was yours all along, Evan said, half accusation, half awe. Better than a shiny thing in a box, Amelia answered. Ruger yawned as if ceremony were another command finally checked off. Evening light turned Charlotte's meadow rose gold, while the trio set off toward it, already planning where the seedling would root. Saturday dawned with dinner. Why is it so quiet? Amelia asked. Maybe the bakery ran out of coffee, Evan teased, yet unease fluttered. They unfolded wheelchair, leashed Ruger, and headed toward Carter's Hardware. Only one newspaper remained inside the dusty plexiglass box. Bravery blooms at Willow Creek. Local girl and rescue dog turned tragedy into triumph, screamed across the top, Nolan Carter's photo beneath. Amelia, hand on Ruger's harness, ringed by lupine, captioned with a single word, safe. Amelia traced the capital letters, half mortified, half glowing. A bell jingled. Mrs. Johansson from the quilt shop called softly, New mural's almost done. Council wants you there for the unveiling. Mural? Evan echoed. But Amelia's wheels were already turning. Down the block, scaffolding framed a red brick expanse, now blooming with fresh pigment. Neighbors, dozens, stood in reverent semicircle, hats in hand, children clinging to balloon strings in awed silence. Art teacher Miguel Alvarez added a final cobalt flick, then saw Amelia and beamed. The sheriff lowered a battery radio. Hush, reclaimed the square. Evan guided Amelia to the rope barrier. Ruger lay sentinel, tail brushing dust. The mural towered billboard large, painted in prairie hues, capable of describing silence without resorting to gray. Center stage, Amelia standing, brace rendered in molten gold, one hand extended toward a horizon awash in possibility. Wildflowers fanned from her feet. Beside her, Ruger sat, coat marked by constellations of russet and scar. His medal gleamed but humble, half hidden under fur. Behind them rose a young ponderosa, outline unfinished, inviting the future to color it in.
No applause, only a collective inhale, a sigh exhaled like prayer. Miguel spoke just loud enough. If anything feels off, we repaint. It's beautiful, Amelia said, voice silk on still water. But the tree should be brighter. Mama loved bright trees. Sunburst glaze tomorrow, Miguel vowed. There's space along the bottom for thumbprint petals. Family first. Paint trays waited, meadow green, sky blue, burnt umber. Amelia dipped her thumb, pressed it to a blank blossom. Miguel produced a paw-sized sponge. Ruger stamped a perfect ochre print beside hers. Evan, hands trembling, chose violet, Charlotte's favorite, and added his own thumb below theirs. Dog, daughter, dad, a triad blooming over brick. Sheriff Moore tipped his hat. Town hoped the mural could speak louder than any article. Looks like it worked. Murmurs rose, gentle laughter, clink of diner mugs, the square inside. Diner windows framed the mural perfectly.
While Amelia shared flaky, iced swirls with the shepherd, Evan studied the painted scene outside, a still life evolving, even as pigment dried. He realized the town, once paralyzed by heartbreak, was learning to stand again, coached by an 11-year-old and a scarred rescue who knew the pace of healing. A bell jingled, conversations budding like evening primrose. Beneath the din, Evan swore he could hear wild lupine rustling on brick, murmuring that quiet, stubborn word, safe.
Twilight unfurled over the ranch like Charlotte's old quilt, edges frayed by cricket song and the creak of settling timbers. Evan, sock-footed, stood on the porch, thumb on the switch of the lone bulb above the door.
They rarely left it burning. Electric cost, Montana's sky-dark purity. But tonight the house deserved its own lantern, echo to the mural's radiance downtown. Filament flared, then settled into an amber halo. Ruger circled the welcome mat twice and dropped, metal glinting like a banked coal between shaggy paws. Scars across his flank seemed less battle map than topography, routes he'd walked to keep them safe.
Long day, partner, Evan murmured, scratching behind tufted ear and feeling the brittle meadow grass Amelia refused to trim.
A distant coyote called. Ruger's ears twitched, but he kept his post. Duty station porch.
Inside, chamomile steamed, Mrs. Thompson's remedy for brace-sore nights. Evan inhaled its calm, then stepped indoors, leaving the bulb to guard the steps. Amelia's room glimmered moon-silver. She lay propped by pillows, brace removed. Charlotte's web fanned open nearby. She clicked off her lamp as Evan entered, preferring lunar light to anything electric. "How's the hero?" he whispered.
Guarding, she replied. He said the porch needs watching.
Evan sat on the mattress edge. "He's snoring already." She smiled, lashes half-masked, meadowlark pin winking from her collar. "Does the porch light reach the meadow?"
Maybe the first fence post,
he said, brushing a curl from her cheek.
I like to think Mom can see it, like telling her we got home safe.
Silence pooled warm as chamomile. Amelia traced the scar across Evan's knuckle, souvenir of the fire that took Charlotte. "Ruger always saves me," she whispered, drowsy.
But I think I saved him too.
Evan's throat cinched. "How?"
He had no home when you found him. Bones and empty eyes. Now he has porch lights and grass braids and medals he doesn't care about. He has us.
Tears pricked. "Yes, Ladybug, you saved each other."
And you?
She asked softly. He kissed her hairline. "I was saved the day you were born, but Ruger reminds me, so you remind me too."
Tell him thank you tomorrow.
Irrigation ditch. A satellite slid across the star-fraught sky like a silent bead on invisible string. "Good work today," Evan said to the dog, voice as low as the breeze. Ruger scooted forward until chin met Evan's boot. Connection, quiet but sure.
They stayed that way, silhouettes inside a shallow pool of light, until constellations rotated and dew silvered the grass. Eventually, Evan rose. He left the bulb burning, a lighthouse for souls made of meadow wind and lavender memory. Inside, he locked the door but left the gate of his mind ajar. He peeked at Amelia, sleeping, fingers curled around phantom harness handles, piloting some dream-bright chariot. Hallway light clicked off. Darkness reclaimed the house, everywhere except the porch where the humble filament hummed on, washing Ruger in amber, shading the threshold, shooting faint beams meadowward. Perhaps those threads of light would guide Charlotte's spirit, or any traveler of the quiet realm, to the place where bravery was learning to grow. Tree tall, root deep, in soil still warm from a single whispered word, safe. The first light of summer drew a pale ribbon across Amelia Barrett's bedroom and stopped at the cedar chest where she kept her keepsakes, pebble stars from the meadow, a broken watch that ticked whenever it pleased, and a thick envelope of blank, lilac-scented paper, once owned by her mother. Today she chose one scallop-edged sheet and uncapped the fountain pen Evan had rebuilt. New nib, same scratches Charlotte's hand had left. Ruger sprawled on the braided rug, courage medal chiming whenever he shifted, as though reminding the room that small acts can echo for miles. Amelia breathed the meadow's perfume, sun-warmed grass, pine resin, distant horses, and let the scent quiet the glass-fragile part of her heart. Then she began to write. To whoever finds this, my name is Amelia. If you're reading, you're standing beneath the lone ponderosa on the hill. First, don't pick the flowers. They have work to do. Second, love isn't always loud. Sometimes it growls, sometimes it just stands still, like a dog who refuses to move even when it hurts. Ruger taught me that safe can be a whisper, not a shout. She paused, hearing Evan downstairs. Coffee, newsprint, the house stretching awake, and the late rooster crowing at his own punchline. Her pen flowed again. When I couldn't walk, Ruger became my legs. When Dad forgot how to hope, Ruger turned into a lantern. Scars, he says, are stories with the sharp parts sanded off. She folded more promise into the page. The porch light that burned for strangers. The tree that grew fast because they trusted it with secrets. An open invitation to bear, called Breakfast Before the Sun Eats It, a joke softer now that mornings weren't rushed by fear. Amelia cradled the jar, wheeled to the landing, and Ruger followed with nails clicking reassurance. Dew turned the yard into a galaxy of miniature stars as the ATV bumped up the hill. At the summit, the ponderosa greeted them, its sunburst yellow tips still shining from Miguel Alvarez's glaze. Under that luminous canopy, Amelia dug a shallow pocket, set the jar inside, and pressed soil back into place. For the future, she whispered. Ruger touched his nose to the spot, canine amen, while wildflowers leaned closer to listen. The trio picnicked on biscuits and jam, Evan pouring hot coffee, while Amelia sketched new wings around old scars. Underfoot, her letter began to root, words waiting to bloom for someone who had not yet arrived. By midsummer, Amelia ran, truly ran, braces retired to a dusty hook in the barn. Evan jogged a half-step behind, laughing at the raw miracle of motion. Near the porch, Ruger reclined in thick grass, muzzle silvered to frost. His courage medal now rested in a shadow box indoors, replaced by a simple leather tag etched with one word, safe. Across the yard, a russet and cream puppy named Juniper chased a tennis ball twice the size of her mouth. She skidded, somersaulted, popped up squeaking, then barreled toward Ruger, demanding play. The elder shepherd nudged the ball back. Try again, aim straighter, learn the arc of things, before settling his chin atop crossed paws. Teaching, not chasing, a new duty. Amelia dropped beside him and scratched the silvery fur between his ears. "How's my brave line tonight?" she asked, still honoring the scar that had once mapped his pain. Ruger exhaled a chest-deep hum. Evan watched swallows carve dusk overhead, aware that the ordinary had become its own celebration. Twilight clicked the porch light on. Moths orbited incandescent gravity, while Juniper learned tug-of-war's rhythm. Resistance, release, partnership. "You're doing great," Amelia told Ruger. "I'll keep her in line." Ruger's amber eyes softened with something like gratitude. Soon the race to the porch began, Amelia and Juniper sprinting through dew, Ruger appointed judge. When Evan finally cued bedtime, Ruger paused at the threshold, tasted the breeze, still safe, and then crossed inside, shadow and lamplight layering gently across old ribs. Late September sun turned wheat to liquid gold. Supper was trout grilled on the porch. Juniper collapsed in a heap of puppy dreams. When the house quieted, Evan noticed Ruger's absence, a doorframe where a guardian should have been. But the moment felt cathedral hushed. Instead, he leaned against a weather-grade post and mirrored the dog's stillness. Together, they listened. Owls in cottonwoods, crickets rehearsing for frost, a single straw spiraling from the loft to land on Ruger's ear. He didn't shake it. He seemed weightless, except for his immense presence. Memories drifted past, Ruger leaping through shattered glass, bracing beneath Amelia's first trembling step, teaching a puppy how to aim her joy. All those images carried velocity. Tonight, there was only being. Eventually, Ruger opened his eyes, amber glinting in half-light, and met Evan's gaze. No summons, no question, just the acknowledgement, "You're here." Evan nodded. "I'm here." Wind fell still, the prairie pausing mid-sentence. Evan understood. Ruger was communing with the land that had become their shared marrow, breathing its slow hymn, carving a final stanza into the silence. Clouds blotted the moon, temperature dipped, dew purled on the fence wire. Ruger rose, joints reluctant but obedient, and they walked, side by side, through the porch light's pool. Evan brushed away the straw before they crossed a threshold. Inside, Juniper lay curled at Amelia's knees, the girl lost in homework. Ruger sank at the doorway, facing her bed, exhaling contentment into the floorboards. The geometry felt complete. Young guardian dreaming, old guardian keeping vigil from rest, child breathing safe between them. Evan whispered gratitude into the dark and switched off the hall light. Outside, wind resumed, soft as a benediction, carrying a single refrain across the meadow. Safe, safe, until even the night let it fade. These are the small lanterns Ruger left behind, each one bright enough to guide a traveler home. Love has many languages, and sometimes the truest one is spoken on 4 steady paws. German shepherds like Ruger remind us that devotion can be silent yet steadfast, guarding a child's first step, sharing a porch at dusk, or simply breathing beside us when the world feels too loud. The bond we build with our animals isn't measured in medals or miles,
but in the everyday moments when two heartbeats fall into the same gentle rhythm. If you ever feel like deepening that rhythm with your own dog, you might enjoy leafing through the American Humane Society's free Better Together guide. It's not a program to buy, just thoughtful ideas for games, small training tweaks, and ways to read the feelings behind those soft eyes. Take a look whenever it suits you, and give your good dog an extra scratch tonight. They already know you love them. It never hurts to show it one more time.